The contractions started at 9 p.m. Serena Caldwell knew the moment she felt the first real one, not the false alarms from the weeks before, not the dull aches she had quietly endured alone on the couch while Ethan worked late. This was different. This was the kind of pain that made your body forget everything except itself. She reached for her phone and called her husband. It rang 7 times. Then voicemail. She called again and again. By the 9th attempt, her hands were trembling, not entirely from the pain. She typed a text instead, each word careful and slow, the way she had learned to be with him over the past year. I'm in labor, New York Presbyterian, room 412, please come. She set the phone face down on the white hospital blanket and stared at the ceiling. The room smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. Outside the window, New Manhattan was beginning to disappear beneath the first real snowfall of December. Soft, quiet, indifferent. Serena had imagined this night 100 times. Not the pain. She had prepared for that. She had imagined Ethan's hand in hers, his voice saying something clumsy and earnest, the way he used to before everything between them turned cold and careful. She had imagined not being alone. The nurse who came in to check her vitals was a woman in her late 50s, with silver hair pulled back tight and steady blue eyes that had clearly seen every version of this room. Her name tag read, Ruth Mackenzie, R.N. Ruth didn't ask where the father was. She just pulled the blanket higher, checked the monitor, and said quietly, I've got you tonight. 3 words. Serena felt them more than she expected. By midnight, the snow outside was thick against the glass. Ethan had not called back, had not texted, had not walked through that door. Serena was 31 years old. She had argued cases in front of senior partners at 30. She had read 200-page contracts without blinking, but no one had ever taught her how to do this part alone. Then Ruth's phone buzzed. The nurse glanced at the screen. And for just 1 second, something crossed her face that she couldn't quite hide. Not surprise. Something worse than surprise. Ruth turned the phone face down before Serena could see the screen. But Serena had spent 5 years reading people in courtrooms. She had watched witnesses lie under oath, watched opposing counsel hide panic behind expensive suits, watched juries feel one thing and show another. She knew exactly what a controlled reaction looked like. And she knew what it looked like when someone was failing to control one. What was that? Serena asked. Nothing important. Ruth set the phone in her scrubs pocket and moved toward the monitor. Your blood pressure's climbing slightly. I need you to breathe. Ruth. The nurse stopped. There was something in Serena's voice that was not a question. It was the same voice she had used in boardrooms, in depositions, in every room where someone had underestimated her. Quiet, certain, immovable. Ruth turned around slowly. She looked at the woman in the bed, pale, exhausted, 31 weeks of carrying this pregnancy mostly alone. And something behind her professional composure shifted. A photo was posted, Ruth said carefully. About 40 minutes ago. It's been picked up by a few accounts. Of what? Ruth exhaled. Of Ethan, at the Plaza. The Plaza Hotel, 15 minutes from this hospital. Serena knew the address the way every Manhattan attorney knew the landmarks. 5th Avenue, Grand Army Plaza, the gold-lit entrance that appeared in 1,000 photographs of 1,000 celebrated evenings. He's at an event? Serena asked, though something low in her stomach already knew the answer was worse than that. He was on one knee, Ruth said, in the main hall, in front of a crowd. She paused. There was a woman and a ring. The monitor beside Serena's bed let out a long, steady beep. Outside, the snow kept falling over Manhattan, over the glittering windows of the plaza, over the dark surface of Central Park, then over the yellow cabs moving slowly through streets that didn't stop for anyone's grief. Serena did not cry. She looked at the window and said nothing for a very long time. Then she held out her hand toward Ruth. "Bring me the discharge paperwork," she said quietly, "and a pen." Ruth did not bring the discharge paperwork. Instead, she brought something else: a glass of water, a clean towel, and the particular kind of silence that meant she was staying whether Serena asked her to or not. She pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down without a word, the way someone sits with a person who has just received news that rearranges everything. Serena stared at the ceiling for a long time. She was not thinking about Ethan on one knee in the gold light of the plaza. She was not thinking about the woman he had chosen to kneel for, the ring he had picked out, the crowd that had applauded. She was thinking about a Tuesday morning 2 years ago when she had sat across from him at their kitchen table in their Upper West Side apartment, both of them drinking coffee, and he had reached over without saying anything and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She had thought then, this is enough. This is everything. She wondered when he had stopped meaning it. Another contraction came, harder than the last. Serena gripped the bed rail and breathed through it the way Ruth had shown her. Slow in, slow out, eyes fixed on one point: the snow outside, the single orange glow of a street lamp cutting through the dark. When it passed, she picked up her phone. Not to call Ethan. She was done calling Ethan. She opened her email instead and typed 4 words into the search bar. The name of the law firm that had drafted her prenuptial agreement 3 years ago. The firm her father had insisted on. The firm she had quietly kept on retainer without ever telling her husband. The most recent email loaded immediately. It was from Preston Hale, senior counsel at Caldwell and Associates, sent 6 days ago. She had not opened it yet because she had told herself she was not ready. She opened it now. She read it once. Then she read it again. When she set the phone down, her hands were completely steady, and for the first time all night, so was her breathing. Noah came into the world at 3:17 in the morning. No fanfare. No husband rushing through the door at the last second, breathless and apologetic, grabbing her hand just in time. No moment that looked anything like what Serena had once quietly hoped for. Just the sterile white light of the delivery room, Ruth's steady voice counting her through each breath, and the small, furious cry of a boy who had decided he was done waiting. The nurses placed him on Serena's chest. She had prepared herself for this moment intellectually, the way she prepared for everything. Read the books, understood the biology, managed her expectations. She had told herself it would be overwhelming, and she would handle it the way she handled everything else. She was not prepared. He was so small. His face was scrunched and red and impossibly earnest, like he had strong opinions about being born at 3 a.m. in a December snowstorm and was not afraid to express them. His fingers, when they curled around her index finger, were the size of a paperclip. Serena pressed her lips to the top of his head and closed her eyes. For exactly that moment, just that one, she let herself feel the full weight of everything. The loneliness of the past 6 months. The phone calls that went unanswered. The slow erosion of a marriage she had tried to hold together with both hands, while her husband had apparently been planning a different future entirely. She let herself feel it. Then she exhaled. "His name is Noah," she told Ruth, her voice quieter than she intended. "Noah Gerald Caldwell." Ruth looked up from the chart. Gerald, Serena's father's name, not Voss, not hyphenated, just Caldwell. Ruth wrote it down without comment, but Serena caught the expression that crossed the older woman's face. Not surprise. Recognition. Not like someone watching a decision being made that was a long time coming. Serena looked down at Noah, who had stopped crying and was now simply watching her with dark, unfocused eyes. Ethan's phone, at that exact moment, was turned off. But in 6 hours, his lawyer's office would open, and a very specific envelope was already waiting on the front desk. The lawyer's name was Marcus Webb. He arrived at his Midtown office at 8:47 a.m., shaking snow from his coat, coffee in hand, already running through his Tuesday calendar. He was Ethan Voss's personal attorney, had been for 4 years, and he was good at his job in the particular way that men like Ethan required. Discreet, efficient, unsentimentally loyal to whoever was paying him. On his desk was an envelope. It had been delivered by courier at 7:15 a.m., before anyone on his staff had arrived. The return address was Caldwell and Associates, 445 Park Avenue, New York. The name on the front was his. He set down his coffee and opened it. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a signed copy of the divorce petition. The same one Marcus himself had prepared 3 weeks ago at Ethan's instruction. The one he had sent to the hospital the previous evening, fully expecting it to sit unopened for days while Serena recovered. She had signed it. Every page, every line. The ink was clean and deliberate, the signature of someone who had not been crying when she wrote it. The second document was something Marcus had never seen before. He read the cover page once. Then he sat down slowly in his chair and read it again from the beginning. It was a trust disclosure filing, dated 14 months ago, registered quietly through a Delaware holding entity that Marcus had never encountered, despite 4 years of handling Ethan's financial affairs. The document outlined the terms under which a private investment fund, controlled entirely by the estate of Gerald Caldwell, had provided the foundational capital for Voss Digital's Series A round, $12 million, with a single clause on page 9 that Marcus had to read 3 times to fully absorb. In the event of divorce initiated by either party, all invested capital becomes immediately callable upon settlement of marital assets. Marcus picked up his phone and called Ethan. Ethan answered on the second ring, his voice loose and unhurried, the voice of a man who had slept well. "We have a problem," Marcus said. A $12 million problem." Ethan's voice changed the moment Marcus said the number. That was something for later. What was happening right now, at the same hour, in a quieter room on the 4th floor of New York Presbyterian, was something that no lawyer could prepare anyone for. Ruth Mackenzie waited until the morning nurse had finished checking Noah's vitals and left the room. She waited until Serena had eaten half of the hospital breakfast she had been brought. Scrambled eggs gone cold, orange juice in a plastic cup, and had settled back against the pillow with the particular exhaustion of someone who had been awake for 22 hours and was running entirely on something beyond sleep. Then Ruth reached into the pocket of her cardigan. Not her scrubs. Her cardigan, the gray one she wore over her uniform on long overnight shifts. The one she had worn to work every winter for as long as anyone on the floor could remember. From the inside pocket, she withdrew an envelope. White. Sealed. The edges slightly worn, like something that had been handled carefully for a long time. She held it out to Serena without speaking. Serena looked at the envelope, then at Ruth. "What is this?" "Your father gave it to me 3 years ago," Ruth said. "The winter before he got sick. He asked me to keep it until you no longer needed his permission to be who you already were." She paused. "I think that time is now?" Serena's father, Gerald Caldwell, founder of Caldwell and Associates, a man who had built one of Manhattan's most respected legal practices across 40 years and had never once raised his voice in a courtroom because he never needed to. He had died 14 months ago in a private room 2 floors above where Serena was sitting now. She had not cried at his funeral either. She had stood straight and shaken hands and accepted condolences and driven home alone and sat in the dark kitchen for 4 hours while Ethan slept upstairs. She took the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten page, Gerald Caldwell's handwriting, precise, unhurried, the penmanship of a man who chose every word deliberately. It began, "Serena, if you are reading this, you have already survived the hardest part. What follows is simply yours." Attached behind the letter was a document she had never seen before, a transfer of full voting rights over Caldwell and Associates, signed, notarized, and dated the same week Ethan had first approached Gerald about funding Voss Digital. Ethan Voss did not go to the hospital that morning. He went to breakfast instead. Sarabeth's on Central Park South, corner table by the window. The kind of place where the eggs Benedict arrived on warmed plates, and the coffee was refilled without asking. Natalie Cross sat across from him in a cream wool coat, her left hand resting lightly on the white tablecloth, where the light caught the diamond at a particular angle she had clearly practiced. She was beautiful in the way that photographed well. Polished, deliberate. The kind of woman who understood that appearance was its own form of currency in this city and had invested accordingly. Ethan was in a good mood. He had turned his phone back on at 7 that morning and found 17 missed calls from Marcus Webb. He had not called back yet. Marcus worried about everything. It was what made him useful and occasionally exhausting. Whatever it was could wait until after breakfast. "We should look at the Tribeca listing this week," Natalie said, spreading butter across her toast with the quiet confidence of someone already mentally decorating an apartment that wasn't hers yet. "The one on Greenwich Street, 3 bedrooms? The light is incredible in the afternoon." Ethan nodded. "I'll have Marcus handle the paperwork." Everything in his mind was already handled. The divorce petition had been delivered to the hospital the previous evening. Serena was practical. She would sign quietly, accept a reasonable settlement, and return to whatever version of her life existed before him. He had told himself this story for 3 months and had made it true through repetition. He did not know about the envelope Marcus had opened at 8:47 a.m. He did not know about the letter Ruth had carried in her cardigan for 3 years. He did not know that $12 million of the foundation beneath his company had a name on it that was not his. He cut into his eggs Benedict and watched the snow settling over Central Park through the restaurant window, clean and white and covering everything. His phone rang again. Marcus. Ethan silenced it, smiled at Natalie, and picked up his coffee. Completely unaware that the ground beneath everything he had built was already beginning to shift. The elevator doors opened on the 32nd floor at precisely 9 a.m. Serena Caldwell had not been inside the offices of Caldwell and Associates since her father's funeral 14 months ago. She had stood in this same lobby then in a black dress, accepting condolences from people who had worked alongside Gerald Caldwell for decades. She had left before the reception ended because she could not breathe inside the grief and the marble and the framed photographs of her father lining every wall. She was back now, not in black, in a charcoal wool coat, hair pulled back clean, moving with the quiet focus of someone who had made a decision and was no longer second-guessing it. Noah was with Ruth. The nurse had offered without being asked, in the way Ruth did everything. The receptionist looked up, froze slightly, then stood. "Ms. Caldwell." A pause. "We weren't expecting you." No one was, Serena said pleasantly. The lobby had not changed. Dark wood panels, brass fixtures, the particular silence that expensive Manhattan real estate produces when it is maintained with intention. On the far wall hung her father's portrait, painted the year he turned 60, Gerald Caldwell in a charcoal suit, his expression carrying that combination of warmth and absolute authority that had made opposing counsel uncomfortable for 4 decades. Serena looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. So then she walked past the reception desk toward the corner office that had been her father's, the one that had sat formally unoccupied since his death, preserved carefully by a staff that had genuinely loved him. She opened the door. She sat down behind the desk. She placed the notarized transfer document from her father's letter in the center of the blotter. She opened her laptop, connected to the office network, and began reading 14 months of financial records she had never been given access to before. By 9:40 a.m., she had located the Voss Digital Series A investment file. By 9:53 a.m., she had found the callable clause on page 9. By 10:15 a.m., how she had picked up her father's Mont Blanc pen, the one that had never left this desk, and written 3 sentences to Preston Hale that Ethan Voss would spend the next 6 months wishing she had never written. Natalie Cross posted the photo at 11:43 a.m. It was a good photo. She knew how to take good photos, had built an entire career on the precise calibration of light, angle, and carefully curated context. In this one, she was seated at a window table at Claudette on Fifth Avenue, winter light falling across the left side of her face, the diamond ring catching the sun at exactly the angle she had practiced at breakfast. The caption read simply, "New chapter." 2 words. The kind that invited speculation without requiring explanation. Within 40 minutes, it had 4,000 likes. Ethan saw it from across the restaurant and smiled. This was the version of his life he had been moving toward for 18 months. Clean, visible, forward-facing. No more quiet dinners where no one spoke. No more carrying the weight of a marriage that had become a formality. No more feeling like a guest in his own ambitions. He ordered champagne. What he did not know, at that precise moment, was that Preston Hale had already called Marcus Webb at 10:47 a.m. The conversation had lasted 11 minutes. Marcus had gone very quiet in the middle of it in the particular way that lawyers go quiet when they are recalculating everything simultaneously. What Ethan did not know was that the Voss Digital Investor Portal had received an automated notification at 11:02 a.m. A formal legal notice generated under the terms of the Series A agreement on flagging the callable clause as activated pending divorce settlement proceedings. What Ethan did not know was that $12 million does not disappear overnight, but the confidence of your secondary investors absolutely does the moment word reaches them that your foundational funding has a recall trigger attached to it. His phone had received 4 calls from his CFO since 11 a.m. He had silenced all of them. The champagne arrived in a tall flute, pale gold and cold, catching the winter light beautifully. Ethan raised his glass. Natalie smiled for no one in particular, already composing the next caption in her head. Neither of them noticed the man in the gray suit sitting 2 tables away, quietly closing a leather folder stamped with the Caldwell and Associates letterhead. Ethan's CFO was a precise man named Douglas Farr. Douglas did not panic. It was professionally inadvisable and personally foreign to him. In 7 years of managing the financial architecture of companies that lived and died on investor confidence, he had learned that panic was simply fear with bad timing. He dealt in facts, figures, and the kind of cold clarity that kept boardrooms from becoming disaster zones. But when he called Ethan for the 5th time at 12:31 p.m., and Ethan finally answered, Douglas said 4 words before anything else. "You need to leave, now." Ethan set down his champagne glass. Natalie looked up from her phone. "Douglas, I'm in the middle of—" "3 of our secondary investors have called this morning," Douglas said. Since 11 o'clock, they received notification of the callable clause activation on the Series A. "Oh, Ethan." A pause that carried more weight than most sentences. "2 of them are already talking to their own attorneys." The restaurant noise continued around Ethan. Silverware against porcelain, quiet conversation, the easy soundtrack of a Tuesday lunch in a good Manhattan establishment. None of it touched him now. "That clause can't be enforced without a full settlement agreement," Ethan said, his voice dropping. "The divorce isn't finalized. Marcus called me 20 minutes ago. The notice was issued under the preliminary filing, not the final settlement. It's within the terms." Another pause. "Ethan, Gerald Caldwell wrote that clause himself. His daughter's firm controls the trigger. And as of this morning, Serena Caldwell is sitting in her father's office with full voting authority over the entire trust." Ethan did not move for a long moment. Natalie was watching him now with the careful attention of someone recalibrating. He stood up slowly, reached for his coat, and pulled out his wallet without looking at her. He left enough cash on the table to cover the bill and the champagne he had barely touched. "I have to go," he said. Natalie's eyes dropped to the untouched champagne, then to the cash, then back to Ethan. "Go where?" she asked, but Ethan was already walking toward the door, and for the first time since the night before, his face looked exactly like what it was, a man who had miscalculated everything. The divorce hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in February. Family Court, Manhattan. Room 7B. The kind of room that had absorbed 1,000 endings. Beige walls, fluorescent light, a judge who had seen every variation of human miscalculation that a marriage certificate could produce. Judge Patricia Okafor had been on the bench for 19 years and had developed the particular economy of expression that came from never being surprised anymore. Ethan arrived with Marcus Webb and 2 associates carrying matching leather briefcases. He wore his best charcoal suit, the one he saved for important meetings, the one Natalie had told him made him look like someone who controlled rooms. He had spent the past 6 weeks attempting to renegotiate the callable clause through 3 different legal channels and had been quietly, methodically refused each time. He still believed he could win this. Serena arrived with Preston Hale. She wore a deep navy blazer, hair down, Noah's photo folded in her jacket pocket, the way her father had always carried her school photograph in his. She carried nothing else. Preston carried everything that mattered. 2 folders, precisely organized, placed on the table without ceremony. Marcus opened aggressively. He argued that the callable clause represented an unfair encumbrance on marital assets. He argued timing, procedural irregularity, and good faith investment expectations. He was articulate and expensive and completely prepared. Preston Hale waited. When it was his turn, he stood, opened the first folder, and placed 3 documents before Judge Okafor. The original Series A agreement, signed by Ethan Voss. The trust disclosure filing dated 14 months prior. And a signed letter from Gerald Caldwell's estate attorney confirming the transfer of voting authority. He spoke for exactly 9 minutes. When he finished, Judge Okafor looked at Marcus Webb over her reading glasses with the expression of someone who had already made up her mind before lunch. Marcus began to respond, then stopped. Because the door to room 7B had opened, and Natalie Cross walked in, not as a guest, not as a supporter, but accompanied by her own attorney, carrying her own folder, her diamond ring conspicuously absent from her left hand. She sat down on the opposite side of the room from Ethan and did not look at him once. Nobody in room 7B had expected Natalie Cross, including Marcus Webb, whose composure, already under pressure after Preston Hale's 9-minute presentation, now showed the particular strain of a man holding too many things simultaneously and feeling them all begin to slip. Judge Okafor studied the new arrival with measured patience. "Counsel, is this witness relevant to today's proceedings?" Natalie's attorney, a focused woman named Claire Deaton from a firm on Lexington Avenue, stood immediately. "Your Honor, my client is present regarding a directly related civil matter. We are requesting brief time to submit a filing that bears on the asset valuation before this court." Judge Okafor nodded once. "You have 5 minutes." Natalie sat perfectly straight, hands folded, eyes forward. She had not looked at Ethan once since entering the room. Not when she walked in. Not when she sat down. Not when her attorney began speaking. The diamond ring was gone from her left hand. In its place was nothing, just a pale circle of skin where it had been, like a watermark left behind. Claire Deaton placed the filing before the judge. It was a civil complaint. 14 months ago, Ethan had signed a brand partnership agreement on Natalie's behalf with a luxury lifestyle company in Greenwich, Connecticut. He had represented himself as her authorized business manager? He was not. She had never granted him power of attorney. He had simply signed because it was convenient and because he had counted on her not reading the fine print. The contract had locked Natalie into an exclusivity arrangement that cost her 3 independent deals worth over $400,000 combined. She had read the fine print. The room absorbed this in silence. Ethan's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did. A very small, very fast recalculation that Serena recognized immediately, because she had watched him do it 100 times across conference tables and dinner conversations. She did not turn around to look at him. She looked at Preston instead, who was writing a quiet note in the margin of his legal pad, completely unbothered. This was not her move. She had not arranged this. This was simply the moment when every quiet thing Ethan Voss had done to every person around him decided, on the same Thursday morning in February, to walk through the same door. The ruling came down on a Friday afternoon. Judge Okafor's decision was 14 pages long and written in the precise, economical language of someone who had considered every angle and found only one conclusion worth reaching. Marcus Webb received it by email at 3:47 p.m. He read it twice before calling Ethan. Ethan was at the Voss Digital office on West 27th Street when the call came in. He was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the Hudson River. One of the features he had specifically chosen when he signed the lease 18 months ago, because it made the space look serious, ambitious, the kind of office that appeared in magazine profiles of men who were building something real. He had loved that view. Marcus did not soften it. The callable clause had been upheld in full. $12 million was to be returned to the Caldwell Trust within 90 days per the original agreement terms. The marital asset division had been calculated against Ethan's actual equity position, which, once the callable clause was factored in, left him with considerably less than he had told Natalie he was worth across 3 months of carefully managed conversations. Voss Digital's secondary investors had already begun their exit. Douglas Farr had submitted his resignation by letter the previous Tuesday, quietly and without drama, the way competent people leave sinking situations before anyone else admits the ship is sinking. By the time Marcus finished speaking, Ethan was no longer looking at the Hudson. He was sitting in his chair, the expensive one he had ordered from a design showroom in the meatpacking district, staring at the surface of his desk. His Rolex caught the late afternoon light. As outside the window, the city continued its indifferent momentum, the way New York always did, completely unbothered by any individual's reckoning. He called Natalie. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He called again. Same result. He sat for a long time in the silence of an office that suddenly felt like a stage set, impressive from the outside, hollow when you looked too closely at what was holding it up. He had spent 18 months building a future with someone else's money, someone else's patience, and someone else's forgiveness. And it had taken exactly one Thursday morning in room 7B for all three to run out at once. Ethan came to the Caldwell and Associates building on a Tuesday morning in March. He had not called ahead. Serena learned later that he had stood at the front desk for 11 minutes before the receptionist, a composed young woman named Dana, who had worked for Gerald Caldwell for 6 years and had transferred her loyalty to his daughter without being asked, finally called upstairs. Serena was in a meeting with Preston Hale when her desk phone rang. Dana's voice was carefully neutral. "Ms. Caldwell, Mr. Voss is in the lobby. He says it's personal." Preston looked up from the documents between them. He said nothing. He simply waited with the particular patience of a man who understood that this moment belonged entirely to Serena and required nothing from him. Serena was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "Tell him I'm unavailable," she said, "and that any further communication should be directed to Mr. Hale's office." She hung up. Preston returned to the documents. That was all, but Ethan did not leave immediately. Dana reported afterward that he had stood in the lobby for another 7 minutes, hands in the pockets of his coat, looking at Gerald Caldwell's portrait on the far wall, the same portrait Serena had looked at on her first morning back. The same measured expression, the same quiet authority that did not require a single word to communicate everything necessary. Whatever Ethan saw in that portrait, he kept to himself. He left without sending a message, without asking again. That evening, Serena sat in her father's chair, her chair now. With Noah asleep in the portable bassinet Ruth had helped her set up in the corner of the office. The city moved 32 floors below. The Hudson caught the last of the March light and held it briefly before letting it go. She opened the copy of Meditations she kept in her desk drawer. Her father's copy, the margins filled with his careful annotations in blue ink, and read the same passage Gerald had underlined twice near the beginning. "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." She closed the book. Across the room, Noah stirred in his sleep, made a small sound of pure contentment, and was quiet again. And Serena realized, with a clarity that settled rather than startled, that she was not waiting for anything anymore. Spring came to Manhattan the way it always did, without announcing itself. One morning, the light through the office windows was simply different, softer. The kind that made the Hudson look like hammered silver rather than cold steel. Central Park, visible from the corner of the 32nd floor, had gone from bare gray branches to something tentative and green almost overnight. The city had not changed. The light had simply decided to be generous again. Serena noticed it on a Wednesday. Noah was 4 months old. He had recently discovered that his own hands were fascinating and spent considerable portions of each morning studying them with the focused intensity of a very small person, confronting a very large mystery. Ruth visited every Sunday. She brought food she claimed was for Serena, but was transparently an excuse to hold Noah for 2 hours, while Serena slept in the chair beside them. Preston Hale knocked on the office door at 9 a.m. and left a coffee on her desk without interrupting. He had been doing this for 6 weeks, not every day, just the days that felt heavier than others, which he seemed to know without being told. They had not defined anything between them. There was no urgency to. Some things, Serena had learned, were worth letting arrive at their own pace, rather than drafting them into existence. She was in no hurry. Caldwell and Associates had taken on 4 new clients in the first quarter. The staff, people who had loved her father and chosen to stay, had welcomed her leadership with a quiet steadiness that she was still learning to receive gracefully. Dana had started leaving fresh flowers on the reception desk on Mondays. Nobody had asked her to. On the credenza behind her desk sat 3 things: her father's Mont Blanc pen, Noah's first photograph, I'm taken by Ruth at 3:17 a.m. in a delivery room while snow fell outside, and a handwritten note from Gerald Caldwell's letter, framed simply in plain black. What follows is simply yours. She picked up Noah from his bassinet and stood at the window. He looked at the city below with enormous dark eyes, serious, curious, completely unafraid. Serena pressed her lips to the top of his head. She had not rebuilt herself from the rubble of what Ethan had left behind. She had simply cleared the rubble away and found that she had been standing on solid ground the entire time. Outside, the Hudson caught the morning light. Preston knocked once, opened the door slightly, and said quietly, "When you're ready." And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was. And that's where Serena's story ends, or maybe where it truly begins. If you're still here with us right now, I want you to know something. That means something landed for you. Maybe it was the image of her signing those divorce papers from a hospital bed with steady hands. Maybe it was the moment she walked back into her father's office and simply sat down. Maybe it was just Noah, 4 months old, studying his own hands like they contained every answer worth finding. Whatever it was, that feeling is worth paying attention to. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that Gerald Caldwell underlined twice and that Serena kept framed on her desk. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That's not a quote about revenge. It's not about winning. It's about the quiet, unshakable decision to stop letting other people's choices define the ground you stand on. Serena never set out to destroy Ethan. She simply stopped protecting him from himself. And that stillness, that refusal to collapse, was the most powerful thing she ever did. If this story reminded you of your own strength or someone you love, share it with them. Leave a comment below telling us which moment hit you hardest. And if you're new here, welcome. Subscribe and stay with us, because every story we tell is really about one thing: the kind of person you become after the hardest night of your life. You are not defined by what was done to you. You are defined by what you quietly, steadily build next. Before we close, a quick note for our community. The story you just experienced, Serena, Ethan, Noah, Ruth, and everyone in between, is a work of fiction. Every character, name, location detail, and event was created entirely for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real people or actual events is completely unintentional. We craft these stories because we believe deeply in the power of narrative. The way a fictional journey can illuminate something painfully real inside all of us. The emotions are genuine. The lessons are genuine. The characters themselves, however, live only in the story. We also want to be transparent with you. Some scenes reference real locations and real brands as natural parts of the story's world, not as endorsements or paid placements of any kind. They exist simply because good storytelling lives in specific, recognizable details. Thank you for watching with open eyes and an open heart. That trust means everything to us, and we will always honor it honestly. See you in the next story.